Hello, I wanted to let you know about this new book that has recently been published. It's the second book in the Essence of Meditation series. The first one was Being Aware of Being Aware, and this one is called Being Myself. And it's a collection of meditations that I initially gave live during meetings and retreats, and they've been gathered together here in this book. There are 13 chapters, 13 meditations, and I'll just go through them and read little passages from some of the chapters to give you a sense of the book. The first chapter is called The Sense of Being Myself. Everyone has the sense of being myself. The sense of being myself is our most ordinary and intimate and familiar experience. It pervades all experience, irrespective of its content. It is the background of all experience. The sense of being myself never leaves us and cannot be separated from us. Being myself is the ever-present factor in all changing experience. And then later on in this chapter it carries on to describe the qualities of peace and happiness that are inherent in ourself or in our being. Sharing none of the agitation of our thoughts and feelings, our essential self or being is inherently peaceful. Just as the space of a room cannot be agitated by any of the people or the objects within it, so our being cannot be disturbed by anything that takes place in experience. And thus its nature is peace. In the absence of any inherent sense of lack, our being is naturally fulfilled, needing nothing from experience to complete itself. Just as nothing in a movie adds anything to or takes anything away from the screen. Thus, peace and happiness are the natural condition of our essential being. And they inform the thoughts, feelings, activities and relationships of one who knows their self clearly. And then this chapter carries on to describe how our essential self, or the sense of being myself, becomes mixed with the content of experience, and as a result our innate peace and happiness are veiled. When we allow our essential self to become mixed with or identified with the qualities of experience, its natural condition of peace and happiness is veiled or obscured. Just as water has no taste of its own, but assumes the taste of whatever it is mixed with, and seems to become, for example, tea or coffee, so our essential self or being has no attributes of its own, but assumes the qualities of experience, and seems to become a person, a finite self, or an ego. So chapter 2 is called Our Naked Being, and it describes the utterly intimate and yet impersonal and unlimited nature of ourself. When we are divested of the qualities and limitations we acquire from experience, only that which is intrinsic to us, our naked, unconditioned being, remains. In fact, we cannot even call it our being, For without limitations, it is no longer coloured by the characteristics of a person. It is our innermost essence and is at the same time utterly impersonal. Intimate, impersonal, infinite being. Being is not a quality or an attribute belonging to a person. A person is a temporary name and form of intimate, impersonal, infinite being. It is this impersonal, infinite being that shines in each of us as the sense of being myself before it is qualified by experience. So chapter 3 is titled I Am. And I'll read you a short passage from this chapter. Divested of the qualities that it derives from experience, our self is without personal characteristics or attributes. For all such traits are derived from personal experience. Our essential self is thus impersonal, and yet it is utterly intimate. It both transcends experience and is immanent within it. There is no aspect of experience that is not pervaded by our self or our being. At the same time, our self or being does not share the limits or the destiny of anything that takes place in experience. The being that shines in each of our minds as I or I am is not a personal being or self. It is the single, infinite, indivisible and impersonal being refracted into numerous apparent selves without ever itself becoming fragmented or divided. We all share the same being. Chapter 4 is titled Our Self is the Knowing Element in All Experience. And it suggests a simple question which takes us directly to our essential irreducible self or being. What is it that knows or is aware of our experience? Allow the question to take you from whatever you are aware of to that which knows or is aware. Going on, chapter 5, called The Nature of Our Self, draws attention to its changeless nature. Nothing ever happens to awareness. It is never changed, moved, or harmed by any experience. Just as a screen is never stained or tarnished by the content of a movie. Awareness is always in the same transparent, luminous, spacious, welcoming condition. Just as nothing that takes place in a movie adds or removes anything from the screen. Nothing that takes place in experience adds or removes anything from our essential nature of pure awareness. We are never aggrandized or diminished by experience. Chapter 6 is called The Memory of Our Eternity. So sometimes in the traditional literature, our essential self, the presence of awareness, is described as being eternal and infinite. And these words can sometimes sound abstract and hard to relate to in our experience. So this chapter is an attempt to help us to understand the eternal, infinite nature of ourselves in our actual experience. I'll just read a short passage from it. Describing ourself as infinite and eternal may seem to imply that it is at a vast distance from the very ordinary, intimate, familiar experience that we know as myself. Nothing could be more misleading. Infinite, when used in relation to ourself, simply means that ourself does not share the limitations of experience, just as the space of a room shares none of the limitations of the objects within it. Likewise, eternal does not imply that our self resides in some mysterious dimension of which we have no experience. It just means that whilst all thoughts, images, feelings, sensations and perceptions continually appear and disappear, our essential self or being remains present throughout. Our essential self is the ever-present factor in all temporary, changing experience. It does not exist on the horizontal dimension of time. It is the vertical dimension of being. Chapter 7, The Unveiling of Myself. And it uses the analogy of a watercolour painting to try to give us a sense of, that tries to evoke the recognition of our essential self. The sense of being myself is an opening in the mind through which we may pass on our return home from the adventure of experience. Imagine that you are looking at a watercolour of a landscape under a cloudy sky, and your attention is drawn to one of the clouds in the distance, which has caught... Sorry, I'll read that again. Imagine that you are looking at a watercolour of a landscape under a cloudy sky, and your attention is drawn to one of the clouds in the distance, which has caught the rays of the sun and is particularly bright. Looking more closely at the painting, you notice that this is the only part of the paper where the artist hasn't applied any watercolour. From a distance, the bare patch of white looks like an object in the painting, a cloud, one object amongst many. But from close up, you see that there's no paint there, only white paper. The sense of being myself, or the knowledge I am, is the little patch of white paper in the painting of experience. It seems to be an object in experience, one amongst many. But on coming closer, we see that it is an opening, a portal to our essential self or being, the ever-present background of all experience. Chapter 8, The Joy of Being. Chapter 8 talks about the traditional idea of enlightenment or awakening, and in particular addresses a common misunderstanding that enlightenment or awakening is an extraordinary or an exotic experience. So it attempts to show that actually what is traditionally referred to as enlightenment or awakening is not extraordinary or exotic. In fact, it's not an experience at all. So I read just a paragraph from this chapter. What is traditionally referred to as enlightenment is not an evolution or a development of our self. It is simply the revelation of the self that lies at the heart of all experience, irrespective of its content. The self that we always and already are, but have overlooked due to the clamour of experience. And it then goes on to address another question that quite often comes up, namely for looking for signs of enlightenment. I'll just read the two last paragraphs. It would be better not to look for any signs of enlightenment. But if we were to, the best we might find would be a causeless peace and joy that accompanies all experience, irrespective of its content. That would be the first sign in the mind of that which lies behind the mind. This peace is not the result of what is or is not taking place in experience. It is the peace that underlies and pervades all experience. It is the peace that passeth understanding. So number 9, in chapter 9, we begin to turn our attention away from our being towards the world. So the first 8 chapters are involved in what I sometimes refer to as the inward-facing path, where we turn our attention away from the content of experience. This chapter, we turn our attention back towards the content of experience, in this case the world, in order to facilitate this recognition that what we essentially are and what the world essentially is one and the same reality. So in this second stage, the outward-facing path, or what I sometimes refer to as the way of inclusion, we face the objective content of experience from which we previously turned away. But we no longer lose ourself in it. We allow it to merge into ourself. We do not go towards experience. We let experience come to us. Experience always takes place in the same place, the placeless place where awareness is, where I am. And later on in this chapter, we discover that experience no longer has the capacity to obscure or veil our being. And as a result, we no longer need to turn away from it. Our being is, or rather, infinite, impersonal being is seen to be immanent within all experience, not just transcendent of experience. Experience, I read now a paragraph, experience has lost its capacity to veil ourself from ourself. It has lost its ability to disguise its reality and instead shines with it. We find ourselves equally at home in the presence and in the absence of experience. Chapter 10, peace and happiness lie in the depths of our being. And this is a restatement, really, of the essential understanding that lies at the heart of all the great religious and spiritual traditions, namely that peace and happiness are the very nature of our self or being. I'll just read a couple of short paragraphs. The peace and happiness for which we all long reside in the simple knowing of ourself, in the knowledge I am, in the awareness of being. Suffering ensues when we allow awareness of objects to eclipse awareness of being. Happiness is revealed when we allow awareness of being to outshine awareness of objects. Chapter 11, establishment in our true nature. And this chapter explores the familiar experience of that many people report of going back and forth from the content of experience to the presence of awareness in the background. And so this chapter explores gradually becoming established in one's true nature. And I liken this back and forth process to meeting someone at a party. So I'll just read you these few chapters. At first, most of us glimpse our essential being in the background of experience, only to find it, through force of habit, almost immediately eclipsed by the content of experience. In this case, we may repeatedly trace our way back to ourself until we begin to be established in it, as it. It's like meeting a stranger at a lecture or a party. Initially, we catch sight of them briefly, and although we have never seen them before, our interest is awakened. We seem to recognize them. For some time, their memory disturbs us, as if calling us to something we have always known, but have forgotten. 2 weeks later, we come across them again in the supermarket. It seems like a coincidence, but at the same time we are not surprised. We arrange to meet for coffee and begin to become acquainted, and we notice that the deeper the acquaintance, the greater the desire to know more. Next we meet for dinner, and soon we spend the weekend together. Some months later we move in, and happily live ever after. And hopefully live happily ever after. For most of us, the recognition of our true nature takes place in a similar way. Repeated glimpses, followed by gradual establishment, although in rare cases the first recognition is sufficient and is never again eclipsed by experience. Either way, once we have had that first glimpse, our life is never the same again. We have been disturbed by something that is recognized to be at once new and familiar. After this first recognition, we become curious. We may seek out a friend, read a book, watch a video, or simply investigate within ourselves. Sooner or later, we are led back to the same experience, to our own being, in its original naked condition, before it is qualified by experience. And again we taste its innate peace and joy. We rest there. For how long we do not know, since this does not take place in the same time as does our everyday experience. Eventually, through force of habit, objective experience draws us away from ourself. However, we notice that each time we return to ourself, we seem to rest there a little longer, and as we do so, the habit of getting lost in experience is gradually eroded. Experience has lost its power to take us away from ourselves. I'm going to just go back one paragraph. For some time it may seem that we go back and forth between our objective experience and the peace of our essential being. But eventually we develop the ability not only to return to ourself in the background of experience, but to remain there in the midst of experience. Experience has lost its power to take us away from ourself and to veil our innate peace and happiness. We no longer lose ourselves in the content of experience. We are becoming established in our true nature. We have come home. Chapter 12. Keep the name I sacred. And this chapter really discusses the sacred name I. Everybody has the sense of being myself, or the experience I am. If we were to ask any of the 7 billion people on earth, are you present or are you aware? As long as they understood the question, they would answer, yes, I am. Everyone knows their own being. That is, the being in everyone knows itself. The expression, I am, before anything has been attached to it, is the simplest expression of self-knowledge. For in order to say I am, I must know that I am. Ramana Maharshi once said that God's statement to Moses, I am that I am, is the highest formulation of truth in any spiritual tradition. That's why the name I in this approach is considered to be sacred. It is the holy name. It is the name of God. All that is necessary is to sound the name I, or I am, once in our mind, and allow ourselves to be drawn to its referent. It is for this reason that the Zen master Ikkyu is said to have said, of all the koans, I is the highest. And the last chapter, the divine name. This chapter speaks more in religious terms and equates the knowledge I am with God's presence. The knowledge I am, or the feeling of being myself, is a hint of the beloved. It is the perfume of God's presence in the heart. To give oneself entirely to the I am is to lose oneself in God's presence. This loss of one's apparent self in God's presence is the ultimate surrender. As the Sufi mystic Bayazid Bastami said, forgetfulness of self is remembrance of God. And this chapter ends the book with a summary and an invitation. So I'll just read the last page. The knowledge I am is infinite consciousness shining in each of our finite minds. The feeling of being myself is God's presence pervading our hearts. I is the divine name in each of us. Every time we think or say I, we may follow it, like Ariadne's golden thread, to the luminous being that not only lies behind all experience, although it is often found there first, but shines in the midst of all experience, and is all experience. In the knowledge I, or the simple experience of being myself, the peace and happiness for which we long above all else can be found quietly shining. To feel that our essential being is shared with all others is love. It is the means by which conflicts between individuals, communities, and nations may be resolved. The recognition that we share our being with all things places us in harmony with nature and will thereby restore humanity's relationship with the planet. The knowledge of being must, as such, be the foundation of any truly civilized society. All that is necessary is to go to the feeling of being myself, or the knowledge I am, and to sink deeply into it. All that we truly long for lives there, in the depths of our being. If we turn towards it, it will take us into itself. So, those were just some short passages from this new book, Being Myself. And so I hope you've enjoyed them. Thank you. Take care. Bye.